This is the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. I'm Ty Higgins. Unleashing American energy has been part of President Trump's first 100 days in office, and Ohio's electric cooperative representatives were on hand last month as the president signed some executive orders to solidify those efforts. One of those representatives on hand was Craig Grooms, president and CEO of Ohio's electric cooperatives. Craig, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you.
Thanks, Ty. Nice to see you as well.
As I mentioned, you were one of the leaders in the energy sector invited to the White House for the signing of 4 executive orders supporting Cooperative's promise to deliver reliable, affordable energy. Tell us about that experience. Had to be quite an honor to be a part of that.
It was arranged very quickly, but it was an honor. And, I'm a history buff, so I appreciate being in DC and being able to get into at least the East Wing of the White House, which was a great experience. It was a very lively, very positive atmosphere. And it was really, I think it was, set by they had a number of military bands playing music that, allowed the guests to, as they were preparing for the event, to socialize. And it felt very almost like a party. It was a very interesting environment, but very positive, and I really appreciated it. When we were in the East Wing office preparing for President Trump to enter, they staged us. It was a crowded room. They had a lot of photographers and journalists around, and a number of special guests. The Department of Energy Secretary, Department of Interior Secretary was there as well. A number of senators and Congress folks as well, and so it was a great experience. And so the signing of the executive orders, and as we've approached all of the executive orders, we think they're great signals, they're great messages. It's the administration, it's the president telling the country, but also telling the various parts of the government what he wants to accomplish. We've said all along we appreciate the executive orders, but we need some durable policy, legislation, rule changes that come out of the executive orders, and that's what we're looking for. It appears we're going to get that. The executive orders, again, to indicate what the president wants to accomplish, and now he needs those to his departments and some of the legislators to take that and run with it, right, and create the policy changes that we need to effectuate those orders.
So a party-like atmosphere, but serious business being done with these 4 executive orders.
That's a good way to summarize it.
Let's dig in a little bit and talk about what these orders actually do.
Yeah, so part of it is, one of the orders was directed at states that have very, I think, aggressive decarbonization policies and laws. And again, I don't know what he's going to be able to accomplish with that from the federal level to influence what's happening at the state level. But really, he's trying to stabilize the coal industry, allow existing coal plants to stay online, and maybe down the road there's a possibility that we might get some new coal plants. I think that some really we need to have long-term certainty in the industry in terms of the EPA for that to happen. But right now, I think the goal is to retain what is already online. And it goes back to, I think, what we've talked about. There's a lot of value in having a diversified electric supply. We have nuclear, we have coal, we have natural gas, we have some small amounts of renewables. Once one sector takes on too much of the overall supply, you run into risks, whether it's a supply chain disruption or any other volatility. So we've always said there's a place for coal, there's a place for nuclear, there's a place for natural gas, and there's a place for some renewables, right? We just need to make sure that we don't target any one of those sectors and really try to put that sector out of business, because you destabilize the whole power grid when you do that.
As you and I talked over the last year, we talked about some of the plants in our region scheduled to retire in the coming years. What do these orders mean for the future of those plants?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying. We need some durable policy changes. So even before the executive orders, the new EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, was already signaling that they were going to either repeal or rewrite many of the very aggressive rules that were released in 2024. We've been working with the administration, with our partners across the industry, to help support that effort. Most of those rules have been held in abeyance, meaning that the litigation has been suspended. The EPA has indicated that they want to rewrite or repeal those rules, which we think are really a positive for not just our industry, for our country. Many of those rules were written in a way that specifically targeted coal plants, but they also targeted natural gas plants. And those two sectors provide a lot of electricity to the country. And so we felt all along that this was an attack on the reliability of the power grid. And so we were pleased to hear that the administration, that the EPA intends to reconsider those rules, and we've been very supportive of that. And yeah, and I think that's going to be good for the existing coal plants that are out there. It will benefit our coal plants and others that, there were some targeted dates out in the future, 2028 being one of them, where a number of resources had to shut down the way these rules were written. And so I think those will go away, and fortunately, that'll allow some of those plants to continue operating.
So much work behind the scenes by you and your team, of course, at the federal level, things being done as well. But at the end of the day, the Buckeye Power customers will just want to flip that switch and see the light come on. What do these changes mean for those consumers of your energy?
Well, I think it allows us to keep doing what we've been doing. Affordable and reliable power is what we've always focused on, and it will allow us to continue operating assets, generation resources that have a long life ahead of them, right? It doesn't force us into retiring units before they really need to be retired. It doesn't force us to procure new generation resources and spend billions of dollars to procure new generation just to replace an asset that was functioning perfectly well. So that allows us, as we grow in our load, as we see more electrification, it allows us to plan for a new resource when we actually need it and not be forced into replacing something that still works perfectly fine.
Of course, that's a big win for American energy at the federal level. There are things being done at the state level as well. We'll
Mhm.
talk more about that with Craig Grooms, President and CEO of Ohio's Electric Cooperative, coming up after this as the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast continues.
At Ag Credit, our loan officers take the time to understand each operation, its needs, and offer the unique financing solutions it deserves. Whether your needs include financing for equipment, livestock, inputs, farm improvements, real estate, or your home, we've got you covered. With a company vision to inspire growth in agriculture and our rural communities, our team members aren't just lenders. They take an active role in their community and are advocates for agriculture. To apply online or find the location nearest you, visit us at agcredit.net. Ag Credit, committed to agriculture, committed to you.
As the nation's #1 insurer of farms and farm families, Nationwide has long been a reliable resource for rural America. And while the current surge of data, technology, and globalization promises incredible growth potential, each new opportunity is shadowed by rising threats like security breaches, GMO contamination, and supply chain failures. This business is about adapting. It demands a protector just as forward-minded. It demands Nationwide.
Welcome back to the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. Craig Grooms joins us, President and CEO of Ohio's Electric Cooperatives. We talked about, Craig, all the success at the federal level as far as America's energy independence and your sector of the energy world goes. There are a lot of things happening at the state level as well. In fact, just a few days ago, we saw some progress on a bill that may impact you directly. What's happening at the state level that you and your team are having an interest in right now?
Yeah, so both the House and the Senate here in Ohio introduced some energy policy earlier this year that I think it seeks to tweak what was really laid out 25 years or so ago when they deregulated the state. We have retail competition for investor-owned utilities now. The electric co-ops are not part of that. But going back 10 years ago, the investor-owned utilities were required to divest or get rid of their generation. And I think this is just the next inning, if you want to call that, the next act of energy policy in Ohio. And what they're seeking to do is incentivize new generation in Ohio. We've all seen and heard about the data centers, more electrification. And the fact that we operate in a wholesale power market called PJM that administers a capacity in an energy market, and we're not seeing the resources built that Ohio leaders would like to see. Ohio's a net importer of electricity over the course of a year. And with all this new load coming on, I think our leaders recognize they need to do something to incentivize more generation. The wholesale market is really not doing that for them. And so they introduced legislation. It recently cleared after a number of versions, the Senate Energy Committee, and it really introduces tax incentives for companies that want to come in and build and own and operate new power plants. So they're hoping those incentives will be sufficient to bring new generation into the state. There's one issue that they wanted to terminate was they call it a subsidy, but it was really a cost recovery mechanism for the Ohio Valley Electric Corporation, their two power plants. So for the investor-owned utilities, they wanted to end that cost recovery mechanism. And they also wanted to introduce something that's called behind the meter generation. Because of the amount of new load coming into Ohio, they wanted to allow mostly large consumers, the data centers in particular, give them the ability to own and operate generation on the side of their business, which we have a little bit of that now in Ohio, and it's a bit of an unusual arrangement, but we are hearing more of that kind of structure. And so the leaders in Ohio wanted to allow some language in the new energy policy that I think would make it easier for those companies who want to own and operate their own generation on site, trying to streamline that process.
How nimble is your industry? It seems like that it may take a little while to get new energy online, and we see these data centers come in, not to mention Intel and Honda. Were we thinking about this before those came to be, or are we kind of behind the eight ball as far as energy production goes in Ohio?
Well, that's a good and interesting term, nimble, and I think it's a relative term. So in a highly capital intensive industry like ours, that it's billions of dollars to build large power plants. It can take 5, 6 years to come online. When you look at the transmission lines across the state, those take several years to be built and come into service. And so being nimble in the electric business means maybe being able to act within a couple of years. Some businesses, being nimble might mean days, but for our industry, it means years. And so even with new policy, it will take years to see if it really is encouraging and incentivizing the activities and the investments that we need to see in Ohio. Fortunately for the Ohio Electric Cooperatives, we are self-regulated by our own board. And so we make decisions and can act on them and finance them as needed. And we have no other organization or government entity that has to approve our actions. So we can be as nimble as we need to be. For the investor-owned utilities, it really starts with the energy policy and the regulations they have to work with in Ohio. And so once this new policy likely becomes law this month or next month, we'll start to see how the pieces are being played, and we may see some initial indications this summer, maybe into the fall, but I think it'll take a couple of years to play out to really see if this policy encourages and incentivizes the changes that our policy makers are hoping for.
I asked you what the changes at the federal level mean for your customers, but what should listeners and viewers know as the state policy moves through? What are some things they might notice as a result?
Well, for Ohio Electric Cooperative members, I'm not expecting them to see a lot of change. We're going to continue to operate our facilities. We still expect to be able to deliver affordable and reliable power. There's a few provisions in the regulations that might allow some third-party behind-the-meter generators to come into co-op territory. I don't think that's a cost-effective solution, because really what you're introducing is two forms of power supply that a consumer has to pay for: a self-generation and the backup supply that they have that they receive from the electric co-op. So I think it's a disadvantage, because the consumer has to pay for two forms of electricity rather than the one form that they have now. So we're not expecting big changes for Ohio Electric Co-op members. For the rest of the state, again, I don't think you're going to see a lot of changes. Maybe in a couple of years, you'll see something. Initially, I just don't think we can respond quick enough to really cause major changes that consumers would be aware of and notice on their power bill.
Always great information and really shows all the work that does happen behind the scenes with Craig Grooms and his team at Ohio's Electric Cooperative. Craig is the president and CEO. Really great to see you again, and thank you for the update and insights.
Yeah, thanks, Ty. Nice seeing you as well.
Find previous podcasts at ohiofarmbureau.org and search podcast.